It was supposed to be just one night. No strings, no texts after, not even real names if we didn't want to. That's what we agreed on when we met at the bar. And I meant it. I wasn't looking for a relationship, wasn't trying to catch feelings. Hell, I'd only gone out that night because my roommate insisted I needed to stop acting like a widow. The bar was loud, sticky floors, overpriced drinks, a DJ who thought turning the bass up could cover his lack of taste. I hated it the second I walked in. But then I saw him. He wasn't dancing, he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just leaning against the wall near the pool table, nursing a beer, watching the room like he wasn't part of it. I noticed him because he looked like he didn't want to be noticed. Tall, dark hair, slightly curled at the ends like he'd been out in the rain earlier. He wore a plain black t-shirt, jeans that looked lived in, and a pair of beat-up sneakers that made me trust him more than I should have. Our eyes met once, then again. And that was it. I bought another drink, pretending not to care. He came over before I was halfway through it. "You don't like it here either, huh?" he said. Voice steady, calm. I laughed. What gave it away? "The way you've been checking the exit every 5 minutes. Fair enough. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. No flirting, no innuendo. Just normal conversation. His name was Eli. Said he was a teacher, English literature, mostly high school juniors. I told him I was working in post-production, mostly boring stuff. Corporate training videos no one watched. He asked if I ever did anything more creative. I shrugged. By the end of our second drinks, there was a pause. A long one. Then he said it. "I don't normally do this, but you want to come back to mine?" I should have said no, I knew better. I'd been through enough to know that random hookups don't lead anywhere good. But he didn't feel like a random hookup. He felt like a question I didn't know how to answer. So I said yes. Eli's apartment was quiet, tidy, filled with books and soft light from old lamps. We barely made it through the door before his lips found mine. It was slow, unsure at first, like we were both testing if this would feel real or just convenient. But it was real. Too real. We didn't talk much after that. No need. The night was warm, the windows cracked open, and the sounds of the city slipped in like whispers. We moved slowly, like neither of us wanted to break the spell, and afterward, when the silence settled in and our breathing synced up, I thought he was asleep. I almost hoped he was. Because I looked at him, the way his chest rose and fell, the curve of his lips relaxed in the dark, and I knew I was in trouble. This wasn't just intimacy. I was already hooked, and that was just night one. I didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't because Eli was snoring. He didn't, or because his bed was uncomfortable. It wasn't. It was because I couldn't turn my brain off. I kept replaying everything, from the way he kissed me to how he touched my arm when he asked if I was okay. I lay there in the dark, eyes wide open, wondering what the hell I'd just walked into. When the sun started peeking through the blinds, I gave up on pretending to sleep. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, careful not to wake him, found my jeans, pulled on my shirt. I was halfway to the front door when I heard it. "You're not gonna say goodbye?" I turned. Eli was sitting up, rubbing his eyes with the heel of his hand. His hair was a mess, and his voice was still gravelly from sleep. "I didn't want to wake you," I said, awkwardly shifting my weight. "Figured it was a one-night thing." "Was it?" I didn't know what to say. My default answer would have been yes. That was the deal. But now that we were here, in daylight, and he was looking at me with those tired but honest eyes, I wasn't sure. "You tell me," I finally said. Eli nodded slowly, then pushed the blanket aside and stood. "Let me make coffee. If you want to talk." I should have said no. I should have walked out the door and chalked it up to a good night with someone I'd never see again. But I didn't. Instead, I followed him into the kitchen. He moved around like he'd done this 1,000 times, pouring water, measuring grounds, pressing buttons. I watched from a stool at the counter, still barefoot, still unsure. "So," he said, finally looking at me as the coffee brewed. "What's your story?" I laughed. You mean my tragic gay backstory? Sure, that, or why you looked so alone at a bar full of people. Touché. I hesitated. I didn't like opening up to strangers. But maybe he wasn't a stranger anymore. Broke up with someone a few months ago, I said. Well, he broke up with me. Said I was emotionally unavailable. Were you? Probably, Eli nodded like that made sense. It happens. What about you, I asked. You always invite strangers home? He raised an eyebrow. Only the ones who look like they're about to cry into their vodka soda. I smirked despite myself. So what now? He poured 2 mugs and slid one to me. Now you drink this. Then, you can leave. Or not. I'm not gonna push. I just liked talking to you. That sentence hit harder than it should have. I like talking to you too, I said, staring into my cup. More than I expected. He leaned on the counter across from me. You don't have to decide right now. Maybe we don't call it anything. Maybe we just hang out again. No pressure. I nodded, unsure of what I was agreeing to. We didn't make any grand decisions that morning. I finished my coffee, he walked me to the door, and we exchanged numbers. It felt casual. Easy. But something about it stuck with me the whole subway ride home. I got back to my apartment, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the edge of my bed, still in last night's clothes. One night stand. That was the deal. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to keep pretending that was all it was. For the rest of that Sunday, I told myself I wasn't going to text him. I mean, what would I even say? Thanks for the night and the coffee, hope your weekend ends strong? No. Too much. Too weird. I kept my phone face down on the table while I did laundry, answered some client emails, and half-watched a documentary I couldn't remember the name of 10 minutes later. But every time I passed my phone, my eyes drifted to it. At one point, I picked it up and opened our thread. Just a single message from when he gave me his number. This is me, Eli. No emoji, no punctuation. Just simple. I stared at that message for way too long. Finally, around 4:30, I cracked. Just one message. Chill. No pressure. Me. Hey. Just realized I never got to finish my coffee. Rain check? The dots appeared almost immediately. Eli. Only if I get to pick the place. We ended up meeting at this quiet cafe on Tuesday night. It was small, tucked between a laundromat and a bike shop, and smelled like cardamom and fresh bread. Eli was already there when I arrived. Sitting by the window, a paperback copy of The Road in one hand, tea in the other. Wow, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. You actually read outside of your job? Of course, he said without looking up. I have to remind myself that not all books are essays on Lord of the Flies. It was like that from the start. Easy banter, low stakes, nothing forced. He asked about my job, about the weirdest edit request I'd ever gotten. I told him about the time a client asked me to Photoshop a smile onto a guy's face during a workplace misconduct training video. He choked on his tea laughing. That was the night I learned he hates mushrooms, listens to 90s emo when he grades papers, and has never seen The Matrix because he missed the cultural window. When we walked out into the cool night, I thought he might go for a hug. Instead, he reached for my hand. Just slightly. His fingers grazed mine and then stayed there. We didn't talk about it. We just kept walking. I didn't sleep with him that night. Not because I didn't want to. I did. But because I knew if I did, it would mess with my head. Again. And this, whatever this was starting to feel like something I didn't want to mess up. By the time I got home, I had a smile on my face I couldn't shake. I flopped onto my bed, still fully clothed, and just stared at the ceiling. What the hell was happening? This wasn't a hookup anymore. We texted the next day, and the day after that. Then we made plans for the weekend. A hike, of all things. I hadn't been on a hike since college, but I said yes because Eli seemed genuinely excited, and the idea of seeing him again made my chest feel warm in a way that felt new. On Saturday, he picked me up in his dusty old Subaru, the kind that had survived more than one questionable road trip. He handed me a coffee when I got in, already knowing how I took it. We drove out to a state park an hour away, listening to playlists, and trading dumb stories about our worst high school experiences. By the time we reached the trailhead, it already felt like we'd known each other longer than a week. The hike was steep in places, and I was embarrassingly out of breath by the time we reached the overlook. Eli just grinned and handed me a granola bar like I was a toddler he'd tricked into exercise. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said, standing at the edge of the ridge, wind messing up his already messy hair. "What are you thinking about right now?" He turned, expression unreadable for a second. "Whether this is real. You, us, I don't know." I didn't say anything, not right away, just walked over and stood next to him. Then I took his hand again. And he didn't let go. We started falling into a rhythm after that. Not a relationship. Not yet, at least we didn't call it that. But we saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes more. Coffee after work. Long walks without a destination. Late night texts that turned into early morning breakfasts. We'd curl up on my couch watching documentaries neither of us could remember afterward, or play Mario Kart until one of us rage quit. Usually me. Eli was freakishly good at drifting corners. But there was also something quieter happening beneath all of that. A slow trust building. It was in the way he would absent-mindedly rest his hand on my leg while we sat side by side. In how he'd send me photos of a dog on the street because he knew I liked huskies. In the way he didn't flinch when I got quiet for no reason, just let me be, without trying to fix it. One night, after a particularly long day, I showed up at his place with takeout and the kind of mood that usually drove people away. I barely said 2 words during dinner. Eli didn't push, didn't ask questions. He just sat next to me on the floor, turned on some slow instrumental music, and let the silence breathe. At some point, I rested my head on his shoulder. He leaned his cheek against my hair. That was it. No declarations, no pressure, just that. Later, I told him about my dad, about how he'd stopped speaking to me when I came out at 19, and how we hadn't talked in 5 years. How even now, some part of me still checked my phone on holidays just in case. Eli just listened. He didn't try to say the right thing, he just listened. When I finished, he reached over and touched my hand, squeezing it once, firmly, like he was saying, "You're here now. I see you." I think I fell in love with him a little in that moment. Of course, nothing is ever that simple. A few weeks in, we were back at my place after dinner, curled up under a blanket, half watching a rerun of New Girl when Eli's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face changed, subtly. But I saw it. He silenced the screen and tucked it away, but I caught a name, Sean. I didn't say anything at first, didn't want to be that guy. We weren't exclusive. We hadn't had that conversation, but later, as we were brushing our teeth side by side in the bathroom mirror, I asked, "So who's Sean?" He paused mid-brush, then spit, "My ex." I waited. "He moved to Chicago last year," he added. "Texts me sometimes. Nothing dramatic." "You still talk?" "Not really," he said, rinsing. "It's not like that. Just history. You know?" I nodded slowly. "Okay." But that night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was fear. Fear that this thing, whatever it was between us, was temporary. That maybe I was just a rebound. That maybe I was the calm after a storm, and eventually he'd realize he wanted the storm back. But then, around 3 a.m., Eli turned in his sleep and wrapped his arm around me like it was second nature. And I reminded myself, this wasn't about forever. Not yet. This was about the now. And right now, he was here. So was I. That had to be enough. The next few weeks were good. Not perfect, but real. We weren't pretending anymore. There were silences that weren't always comfortable. And sometimes he'd go quiet halfway through dinner, retreating into his thoughts like a door gently closing. But I didn't mind. I think we both needed that, space to be flawed, and not be afraid of losing each other because of it. Still, that Sean text lingered in my mind more than I wanted it to. Not because I didn't trust Eli, I did. But because it reminded me that we still hadn't defined anything. We were doing all the things couples do, movie nights, lazy Sunday mornings, grocery store trips where we argued over almond milk versus oat, but we never said the word. Boyfriend, We never talked about exclusivity. I didn't even know if he was seeing anyone else. One Friday night, after a long week, I was in bed, scrolling through mindless memes when he texted me. Eli, wanna come over? I got wine and regret buying a frozen pizza that says artisan on the box. Me, only if you let me bully you for that label. Eli, deal, hurry. I'm 2 sips in and feeling vulnerable. By the time I got there, he was on the couch in pajama pants and a sweatshirt that said, "Books Not Bros." He looked exhausted, beautiful, but tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones. "What's going on?" I asked, slipping off my shoes. He shrugged. "One of my students got into a car accident. Not serious, but it shook him up. He called me instead of his parents." "Damn," I said, sitting beside him. "That's kind of a big deal." Eli nodded. "Yeah, I guess I've been more involved with some of these kids than I thought. They see me as someone they can count on, which is great, but also a lot." I didn't say anything right away, just leaned in, shoulder to shoulder. He let out a long breath. Then, softly, "Sometimes I don't know if I'm doing any of this right. Teaching, life, this." "This?" I echoed. "Us." There it was, finally out in the open. I turned to look at him, but his eyes were locked on the wine glass in his hand. "Are we an us?" I asked, careful with my tone, not accusing, just curious. He looked up, surprised. "I don't know. Are we?" "I think so," I said. "At least, I want to be." A pause. Then he nodded. "Me too." It was the first time we admitted it out loud. It wasn't a big romantic declaration. There were no fireworks, no music swelling in the background. Just 2 tired guys on a couch, eating bad pizza and saying, "Yeah, this matters." That night, when I stayed over, things felt different, calmer, like something had settled between us. After we slept together, we didn't talk much, just lay there, bodies tangled under the sheet, his fingers tracing lazy lines on my arm. At one point he whispered, "I'm not used to this." "To what?" "Feeling safe." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He fell asleep with his forehead against my shoulder. But as I lay there in the dark, my thoughts drifted again, to Sean, to that name on his screen, to how we'd said we were an us, but hadn't talked about what that meant. Maybe it didn't matter, or maybe that conversation was still coming. A few days after that night, we hit our first real snag. Nothing dramatic. No shouting match. Just one of those quiet shifts in atmosphere that you don't notice right away. Like walking into a room that's just a little colder than it should be. It started when Eli canceled our usual Thursday night hangout. Said he was buried in grading. I didn't think much of it at the time. He sent a quick, "Sorry, rain check?" and I replied with, "All good, get some sleep." But then he went quiet. Friday came. No text. Saturday. Nothing. I told myself he was just tired. Burned out. Maybe overwhelmed. That much was probably true. But it didn't stop the spiral in my head. And by Sunday, I caved and texted. Me. "Hey, haven't heard from you. Everything all right?" No response for hours. Finally, just after 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Eli, sorry." Been in my head. "Can we talk tomorrow?" That didn't sound good. I barely slept that night. The next evening, I went over to his place. He opened the door, looking like he hadn't slept either. Hoodie, messy hair, a tired kind of sadness in his eyes. We sat on his couch, no TV, no distractions. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this," he said, voice low, "and I'm probably gonna mess it up." My stomach dropped. "Okay," I said carefully. He took a breath. Sean texted again. He's visiting the city next week. He asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I nodded slowly. "And?" I said yes. I stared at him, trying to keep my face neutral. "Because you're curious." "Because I don't know," Eli said, and that stung more than I expected. It's not that I want him back. I don't think I do, But I need to know if that chapter's really closed, if I'm really ready to be with someone else. Someone else. Me. I looked away, jaw tight. So what are you saying? You want a break? No, he said quickly. I don't want to lose this. You. I need to be honest with where my head is. And where is that? I asked, sharper than I intended. He rubbed his eyes. I don't know. We sat there in silence, the kind that wasn't peaceful this time, the kind that stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, I said, look, I'm not going to be a placeholder for someone else. If you need to figure things out, do it. But don't string me along while you chase closure. His face twisted, like I'd hit him. I'm not trying to do that. I know, I said, softer now. But that's what it feels like. He nodded, and for a second, I thought he might cry. But he didn't. He just looked at me like he wanted to say something he couldn't. I'll give you space, I said, standing. You'll know where to find me. I left before he could answer. Back in my apartment, I collapsed onto the bed fully clothed, the echo of his living room still humming in my ears, the smell of his place still clinging to my hoodie. I didn't cry. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how something that started out so simple had gotten so complicated. Maybe we weren't ready. Maybe he wasn't. But the worst part? I wasn't sure if I'd let him go even if I had to. The week that followed felt like winter, even though it was still technically spring. Everything was a little quieter. My apartment, my walks to the grocery store, my Spotify queue. Even my clients noticed. One emailed me to ask if I was okay because my latest video edit felt a little low energy. I wanted to reply, my sort of boyfriend is maybe meeting his ex for coffee, and I don't know if I'm being slowly replaced, but I just added a few upbeat transitions and sent it back with a polite thanks for the feedback. I didn't hear from Eli. Not Monday, not Wednesday, not Friday. I told myself not to text him. If he needed space, I had to respect that. But every time my phone lit up, my heart jumped in spite of myself. By Saturday, I cracked. I didn't text him, not directly, but I walked by his building. Not on purpose at first, but I took a slightly longer route from the cafe, and suddenly, there it was. His building's brick facade, the stoop where we'd sat once eating bagels at midnight, laughing about a guy who tried to sell us artisan lighters in the park. I stood there for a few seconds, didn't go up, didn't knock, just looked, and then I walked home. Sunday morning, there was a knock at my door. It was early, too early for anyone but Eli. I opened it still in sweatpants, hair a mess, coffee mug in hand. He was there, hoodie, backpack slung over one shoulder, and that look in his eyes. Relief mixed with apology. Hey, he said. Voice hoarse. Hey, I replied. Long week? He gave a dry laugh. You could say that. I stepped aside. He came in without asking. We didn't sit down right away. He just stood in the middle of my living room, looking around like it was the first time he'd seen it. Like he wasn't sure what was his anymore. I saw Sean, he said. I waited. We got coffee. It was weird. Nice, but weird. We talked about the past, why we ended, why it was the right thing, and I realized something. I raised an eyebrow. I don't want him, he said. Not anymore. I exhaled. I thought maybe I owed it to myself to get closure, Eli continued. But really, I just needed to stop being afraid. Afraid of what? Of this. Of us. He took a step closer. You came out of nowhere, and I didn't expect to feel safe with someone again. But I do, with you. My heart thudded in my chest. You didn't have to wait for me, he added, quieter now, but you did. And if you still want this, I'm in. All in. It took a moment for the words to register. Then I stepped forward, closed the space between us, and kissed him. It wasn't a hungry, desperate kiss. It was slow, solid, like a promise. When we finally pulled apart, I said, "Next time, just talk to me, okay?" "I will." We sat on the couch, side by side, legs touching, the quiet between us warm this time. I didn't know what the future looked like. There'd still be tough days, maybe arguments, maybe times we'd need space again. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He was here, I was here. And this wasn't just a one-night thing anymore. It was something real. We never had a big anniversary. No candlelit dinner. No champagne toast. No specific date circled on the calendar. What we had was quieter. Mornings where he made coffee and always remembered which mug I liked. Nights where he'd fall asleep halfway through a movie, head on my shoulder, our hands still loosely tangled on the couch. Weekends spent doing errands that somehow felt like memories in the making. About a month after he came back, I gave him a key. I didn't make a big deal out of it. Just slid it across the table one morning while we were eating leftover pizza for breakfast. He looked at it, then up at me, his mouth tugging into a small smile. He didn't say anything, just nodded, pocketed the key, and kept eating. But the way he stayed a second longer at the door before heading to work, the way he kissed me a little slower than usual, I knew what it meant. He was home. For real, this time. Some nights we still talked about our pasts. Not because we were stuck in them, but because we were figuring out how to make peace with them. He told me about his family, how he still hadn't fully come out to his dad. I told him more about mine, about the letters I never sent, and the birthdays I spent refreshing my inbox for messages that never came. We weren't trying to fix each other, just trying to be there while the other untangled old knots. And that was enough. One evening, we went back to the Overlook where we'd hiked months earlier. This time I brought a blanket. He brought a thermos of tea and a pack of gummy bears. We sat there as the sun set, legs stretched out, backs against a tree. Eli leaned his head against my shoulder and said, "You know, if someone told me 6 months ago, I'd be here with a guy who listens to lo-fi jazz remixes and color codes his groceries, I'd have laughed." I nudged him. "And yet, here you are, living the dream." He smiled. "You make me want to stop running." That was the closest either of us came to saying I love you. At least then. It came later, in a moment neither of us expected. We were at a bookstore, of all places. He picked up a copy of Giovanni's Room, skimmed the first page, and said, "You'd like this." I smiled. "I've already read it." "Of course you have," he teased. We didn't buy anything. But as we walked home, he stopped on the corner, right under a flickering streetlight. The kind that made everything look a little nostalgic. He turned to me, hands in his coat pockets, and said, "Hey." "Yeah?" "I love you." I blinked. "You what?" His mouth twitched, almost a grin. "You heard me." I just stared at him. Then said, "Took you long enough," and kissed him right there on the sidewalk, in front of an old Italian bakery and a closed-down video store, with the cold wind biting our cheeks. We went home after that. Together. That night, as we lay in bed, I looked at him and thought about the night we met. The deal we made. One night, no strings, and how he'd broken every rule in the best possible way. Sometimes, love doesn't show up with fireworks or grand gestures. Sometimes, it's a guy who stays when he could have walked away, and lets you stay too.